do you think that you can genuinely love and enjoy your career?
Love the polarizing question. That's what it's all about. So I feel that if I didn't believe that the answer was yes to that, then I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, right? I do genuinely believe that you can enjoy your career, that you can love your career. At the same time, the whole phrase dream career just irks me. And I always try to avoid using it because I feel like the notion of a dream career, which in my mind kind of connotates like perfection, everything's great every day. That's unrealistic, right? I don't believe that there is any profession out there that's always going to be a dream, that's always going to be perfect. But I do believe that you can love what you do enough that when you're in the hard times, you're able to push through those hard times. And you feel like you're connected to something bigger, whether it's the impact that you're making, whether it's the people that are around you, whether it's the work that you're generally doing on a daily basis that can push you through those hard moments.
Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Career Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden, and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know that they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtains and some tips and tricks to ultimately make you successful in your career and help you progress a little bit faster. Welcome back, all of my lovelies. I cannot express how excited I am about today's guest. So she is a good friend of mine. She is a co-coach. She is going to express all kinds of amazing information for us. Today, we're going to be talking about finding the right job with Eliana Goldstein. She is a career and success coach who works primarily with ambitious, career-driven millennials in their 20s and 30s and help them reach the next level in their career or to pursue a career change and pivot into something that's really going to resonate with them. So welcome, Eliana. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Me too. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Awesome. Well, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you and your background and what you're doing so that they can kind of get to know you a little bit before we jump into all the great advice you have for us?
Sure. I'd be happy to give the background. So Kendall gave a fabulous intro in terms of what I do. But prior to this, I worked in the ad tech industry for about a decade. And like many people, climbed the kind of typical corporate ladder. I started off as a marketing coordinator. I moved into account management, then an account executive, grew in my sales career, all the while like having the success that you desire on paper. But behind the scenes was feeling very disconnected from what I was doing and always asked myself, like, can I do this another 10 years, let alone another like 5 years? And it left me in this cycle where I was making a lot of changes and pivots, and I was always good at landing jobs, but I would just find myself in another role that still didn't feel like it was it and still left me questioning myself, which like for many people drove me into a cycle of just feeling insecure about that and doubting myself. And it wasn't until I really decided to get strategic, do a really like full 180 in my career that things changed. And I kind of pursued a process of doing a ton of market research, getting to know myself, auditing myself, understanding the impact I wanted to have, understanding my core strengths. And that's what eventually led me into the world of coaching. And I started off, I went to a coaching certification program to kind of just test the waters and see if I liked it, realized I really loved it, and started building out the business as a side hustle in like very early, late 2019, early 2020. So I'm on my 5th year now that I've been doing this full time, almost 5 years like 4.5 years full time about. And I love it. And I feel very grateful every day to be able to do this. And it's amazing. I feel so happy that this is what I get to do on a daily basis.
That's awesome. So much of you makes more sense to me now, knowing that you were in sales before. I feel like there's a resonating like marketing sales aspect to what you do. And I think it's important to share to listeners. So Eliana and I went to Mexico together on a retreat in April. And it was all about how to develop and how to grow. And Eliana is just that person who always has like the best advice for like where you're going next and what you need to do. And so I can see that translating so well with your clients. And I'm really excited to have her on the show today. So we're going to start with kind of maybe a little bit of a polarizing question for you today, Eliana, which is, do you think that you can genuinely love and enjoy your career?
Love the polarizing question. That's what it's all about. So I feel that if I didn't believe that the answer was yes to that, then I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, right? I do genuinely believe that you can enjoy your career, that you can love your career. At the same time, I am not the career coach that goes, pursue your dream career. Like the whole term of the whole phrase dream career just irks me. And I always try to avoid using it because I feel like the notion of a dream career, which in my mind kind of connotates like perfection, everything's great every day. That's unrealistic, right? I don't believe that there is any profession out there that's always going to be a dream, that's always going to be perfect. But I do believe that you can love what you do enough that when you're in the hard times, you're able to push through those hard times. And you feel like you're connected to something bigger, whether it's the impact that you're making, whether it's the people that are around you, whether it's the work that you're generally doing on a daily basis that can push you through those hard moments. And, I always say like, I am my own boss. Like I run my own business. I love what I do, but it doesn't mean it's perfect all the time. It doesn't mean it's always a dream, right? There's always going to be difficulties. So long way to say, yes, I definitely believe that you can love your career and you can be so inspired and motivated by it. But I don't believe any career is perfect or a dream.
Okay, so I want to double click on something in what you shared because generally, I totally agree with your sentiment, right? There are jobs that are going to be much better fits for us and much more satisfying than others.
Totally.
But I'm curious, when we talk about finding this job that's going to resonate, does it have to be a passion? And here's what I mean by this. I hear people all the time on social media and on LinkedIn talking about how you need to be doing something you're really passionate about with your career. Like if you love to draw, you should be an artist. If you love to cook, you should be a chef. I'm curious if you see that happening in your coaching.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you bring that up. And it's something I do talk about often too, that the notion of like when we talk about bad career advice, the notion of chase your passions, pursue your passions is just one of those pieces of advice that also irks me. We're going to talk about a lot of things that irk me today, probably. But exactly like you're saying, like I always give the example. Let's just say you love art and you land this role at this like prestigious art gallery or art studio. And you're like, I'm in my passion. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to be immersed in art every single day. But your manager is horrible. You have no work-life balance. You're not actually even doing things around art that you enjoy, right? It doesn't matter how passionate you are about art. You're going to be miserable. So passions can play a part, and it's important to know what your passions are. And if you can figure out a way to like interlace your passions into your career, then that's a bonus. That's huge. But that's not ultimately what's going to lead to career fulfillment. And I also feel this is like a generational thing because when I talk about this, I'll like get like hate from like baby boomers who are like, no, what are you talking about? Like, I'm so passionate about my career and it's amazing. I'm like, okay, that's great for you, but that's not how it is for everybody, right? Like, especially when we think about the millennial and Gen Z generation who are ultimately more motivated by other aspects of their careers.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're finding the information on this podcast helpful and you're looking to take control of your career and start to elevate yourself to the next level, go ahead and check out our course. Go to bit.ly/career coach course to get signed up today and to start taking your career to the next level and navigate the secrets of the career game. Yeah, I agree. I agree, right? And I think that this is something that I see all the time. People will come to me and they'll be like, oh, but I'm like really passionate about photography. I like really love doing photography on the weekends. And I'm like an accountant. And I'm like, yeah, well, like, do you like accounting? And they're like, well, I mean, I'm good at my job. And I'm like, great. Do you have a good boss? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, do you like your team? Yeah. Do you like your company? Yeah. Do you get paid a lot? Yeah. I'm failing to see an issue, right? Because I think it is great to have passions. But especially for our generation, I feel like we're working to live rather than living to work. And I'll use my husband as an example. He's an avid golfer. He's a great golfer. He almost qualified for the US Open a few years ago, like very good golfer. Okay. And I like putt. So anywho, but he I talked to him. I'm like, why don't you become like a golf pro? Why don't you try to work at a golf course? He's like, because then it's my job.
Yeah.
Golf
Yeah.
is what I do to get away from my job. I don't actually
Yeah.
want it to be my job. And I think that that's really important is a lot of the time when we talk career clarity or career direction or career strategy, people think it's going to land them in this, like, I love to do X, so now I'm doing that and making money. And a lot of the time I feel like that's a disconnect.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think, like you said, like, I love the example you give too of, okay, this person is like a freelance photographer on the weekends, right? If that is a passion point, then do it in a way that works with your life and schedule and allows you to like really just lean into it purely as a passion. But then when you kind of bring it into your career, like all the strings become attached, you know, and then it just, yeah, it can take what is a passion of yours and just completely drain the passion. So I think that it's important to kind of have those like separations and those boundaries between things.
Yeah. And okay, we're going to take this in an even weirder direction. So I think a lot of people our age are doing side hustles, right? I think side hustle is the new main hustle, right? Everybody's picking something up on the side. And what I think is interesting is you're a very successful business owner. You know, on the trip, we kept saying you were like the CEO of all of us. Like you actually like really run a business, even more so than being a fantastic career coach. You are a business owner. And what I think people forget, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, is doing something you're passionate about does not mean you get to ignore all of the stuff you don't like. Right?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to balance the books. Somebody's got to create SOPs and processes. Somebody's got to bring in clients. Somebody's got to do sales. And you cannot, especially for a side hustle or even when you own your own business, you can't always outsource all of that. And so I think when people think I'm an artist, I want to work in an art gallery, to our earlier example, now you're filling out paperwork, you're documenting stuff, you're answering emails, you're managing a schedule. It's not like you're drawing all day and having a great time. So I'd love to hear your perspective as somebody who has stepped into their passion, started a business, but then also is operating in that CEO seat. How do you feel about like I get to do whatever I want as an entrepreneur or in this passion role compared to what you're actually experiencing?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think it like goes back to even what we were talking about in the beginning, the notion of like the dream job does not exist because no matter how much you love what you do, there's always going to be aspects of it that you don't enjoy. And like you said, you can delegate where you can, but you're never going to be able to delegate everything, right? And I also believe that like there's like a fundamental part of like sometimes doing things that you don't love to push whether it's your business forward or your job forward. Like, I don't know, call me crazy, but I actually think it's sometimes important to do those things because I think it creates a greater appreciation for the things that you do love. And it also helps you analyze and understand like, oh, I love doing this. I don't love doing that. Why do I love doing this? Why do I not love doing that? Right? Like being able to kind of like create that split helps bring awareness for you that you can leverage in your career going forward. So I think it's really important. And yeah, like it's never going to be perfect. And so I'm glad that you bring it up. And I think it's like an expectation that I set with my clients. And what I usually say is like kind of like a rule of thumb is like ideally you want to be enjoying like 70% of what you're doing, right? I think like if you're in a role and you're like 70% of the time, I feel pretty aligned and happy. 30% of the time I'm doing work that's kind of like, or like rather not do it. That's okay, right? And maybe some people will argue with that and say 30%, that sounds like a lot. To me, I think if 70% of the time you can be happy in your career and you're working at a company that you enjoy and you're getting paid well and you have, you know, a great life outside of work, whatever that looks like that's pretty winning. And I do think that sometimes, like I said, that 30% that's sometimes harder can be helpful in ways that we might not realize in this moment.
Yeah, there's an Olympian, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but we're all riding the same train. So she said that in training, if you want to be the best of the best, you should feel good about what you're doing, great about what you're doing 10 to 20% of the time. And you should feel okay about what you're doing 60% of the time. I'm doing good. I'm doing bad. Well, and you should feel awful about what you're doing like 10 to 20% of the time. And that's what makes up training to be the best. Now, obviously there's a much higher level of competition if you're trying to be the absolute best at something, if you're trying to be a CEO. But there is this expectation that we're all going to love it. But if you've ever talked to a D1 athlete or an Olympian or a professional athlete, they're like, dude, it sucks. We work hard all the time because the expectation is you're doing a lot of stuff you don't like so that you can do the things you like really, 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 really well. And I love that. So if we put this in context of finding the right job for yourself, how does this tie to career clarity? Like, how do you help clients figure out the clarity of the direction they should be going in?
Yeah. So like building off of everything we're saying and what we were just talking about before, like things that you like and things that you don't like. One of the first things I like to work on with clients is understanding what I call super fancy, your areas of engagement and your areas of disengagement. Like in your role, where do you tend to find yourself most engaged in the work that you're doing? And where do you tend to find yourself the most disengaged? And we're all like, we're also operating so quickly on a daily basis and very seldomly taking time to reflect that we're not even really aware of these things. And that can be like the first eye opener to be like, oh, I was really engaged when I was doing this project. And then again, like, understanding the why behind it. Why? What skill sets was I specifically leveraging that I enjoyed? And then when I was disengaged, what skill sets was I specifically leveraging that I did not enjoy? And understanding that is going to be really helpful in just kind of like directing the type of work and the projects that you want to do. And then going back to like the passions conversations, my feeling is always don't follow the passions, follow your values, right? And exactly the example we talked about from the art perspective, like, sure, you're working in art, you're passionate about art, but if you value great leadership and you value creativity and you value collaboration, and within that art gallery, none of those values are present, you're going to be unhappy no matter what. So you have to understand, like, what are the core values that are important to me in my career, and making sure that those are being reflected in the role, the company, the industry that you're working in. And so like starting point is really like areas of engagement versus areas of disengagement, understanding that like in combination with your values can really help in terms of the direction and clarity.
This is important, I feel, especially in like the modern company culture that we're experiencing. Right. And you mentioned earlier, like the boomer perspective. And I feel like a lot of us trash on it, but I think it was a very different time. Right.
100%.
If I to corporate world in 70s and 80s, my husband and I actually had this conversation on a hike the other day. It doesn't matter if you're good at your job. If you just stick it out and get stuff done, you're probably going to get promoted every 3 to 4 years. Doesn't matter if your boss is a jerk. You're probably going to get promoted every 3 to 4 years. You're probably going to make more money. You're earning a very comfortable living wage in many corporate vicinities. And I'm not saying they didn't work hard, they didn't have to put in effort. They absolutely did. They had to have that resiliency. But today, if I work a job where I don't have a supportive manager, I'm not getting promoted, period. It doesn't matter how great I am. If I work in a, it doesn't matter if I work there 15 years, I could never get promoted if I'm not doing the work at a certain level. And so I think the values now are so different to be successful in the corporate landscape because the corporate landscape's different. And there's this huge culture component that you're talking about of do they value good leaders or do they value toxic ones? Do they care about work-life balance or do they expect you to work 100-hour weeks and all of those things? And so when you're thinking about career clarity, I love that you say start with the values. I think that is monumental. But then how do you help clients identify which companies align with those values? How do you help them ensure they end up in a position that's going to have those values present?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good question. And I like, you're so spot on with all of that. And like you said, you know, we rag on baby boomers, but it makes sense based on their experience. And like, there's so much more that even goes into that, like cost of like you said, you could work then, go home, take your paycheck home, and you can buy a house. You can do all the things that you want. Like these days, it's so much more difficult. So you need to, beyond just the paycheck, if you're working this hard to not even necessarily be able to live the life that you want, there have to be other components of the career like that we need to be focusing on and that we need to like derive value from. So I love that you said that. In terms of thinking about, now I'm forgetting your question because I went on my tangent. I had it on the tip of my tongue. And now I'm like, what was the question?
How do you ensure clients end up in jobs that the values of the company align with the values they're looking for?
Yes. This is what happens. I get so into it. And then I'm like, wait, what was the question again, Kendall?
Me too. Me too.
How do we align? So a lot of the work that I also do with clients, because a lot of it is clarity heavy in the beginning, is what I like to think of. Like when we think about networking, we generally think about networking like strictly for the purpose of just the referrals, right? Like I want to build a network so that they can start referring me in for roles. I can start getting into the interview process as quickly as possible. When I'm working with a client who really wants to understand, okay, like where do I fit in this ecosystem and what is the company that's going to be good for me? I focus on networking for the purpose of market research, speaking to people who work at companies that are ideal, speaking to companies that we believe that we're interested in, really for the purpose of just vetting and understanding, like, tell me about your team dynamic. Tell me about what the what your managerial relationship looks like. Like, talk to me about turnover at the companies. Like, what are things that you've noticed? Like, things that can kind of help you suss out some of those values. And I like to do that via networking because the truth is that once we get into the interview process, they're trying to sell themselves as much as we're selling ourselves, right? Like, they're not going to be like, well, we've had these issues and this, like, they're not going to be talking about that. Not to say that companies are lying, but you're not having that super honest and authentic conversation when it comes to the interview process, right? So I really like to focus on how do we properly vet the companies through market research in the form of networking with our values in mind so that we can ask the questions that can kind of, again, help us suss out what are some of the core values to that team and that company so that prior to even deciding we want to engage with them via an interview process, like we can feel comfortable and confident that this is a place that we ultimately see ourselves.
That's great. And I would add two things I've started having people do in interviews as well that I think is relevant is one, ask to talk to a peer.
Yeah.
Biggest red flag is the hiring manager does not want you to talk to somebody else on the team.
Yeah.
To me, then they are telling you some beautiful vision of something they have that they want that they can't deliver on, right? So I think talking to a peer, to your point of having that authentic conversation, to the peer, it doesn't do them any good to get you in under false pretenses.
Yeah.
So likely they're going to share more about their frustrations in a way that's closer to the truth than the hiring manager would.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, I think back, there was an interview I did years ago where I did this and I asked for a peer and they said our data is terrible. And I remember being like, if your biggest issue is that your data is bad, I can make that work.
Yeah,
like
100%. You're like, what company's data is not bad? Like,
welcome to every company.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think talking to a peer is really key.
Yeah.
And then the other one that we'll take a little bit more with a grain of salt is I think there are new applications like Fishbowl, Glassdoor's been around a while where you can read reviews. But I think it's also important to keep in mind, like people who have a negative experience have the most incentive to write a review. People who have a positive experience have the least.
Yeah.
But especially if there's something specific to the team you're looking to be on, I find that so much of an individual's experience depends on like their direct boss, maybe their skip level's culture.
Yeah.
And if those two are building a bad culture, then we want to run. If there's a Fishbowl comment that says, gosh, the digital marketing team is terrible, run like you stole something and you're interviewing with digital marketing at that specific company and it's a relatively recent comment, it might be actually indicative of what's happening. So I love that having those pre-conversations. I think that's so key, that market research. But if you find yourself in an interview process where you didn't have the ability to do market research, those are some kind of tail end things you can do to.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And I think too, if you're ever in an interview process and there's something coming up that's a little bit sus and you're kind of like, that was a weird answer and you're not really sure how like honest or authentic they're being, or just like some of the typical red flags that might come up in an interview, that would definitely also be a great point to, like you said, say like, this has been so wonderful. I'm really learning so much. I find that like a really great way for me to, even learn more about the opportunity in the companies to talk to a peer. Would you be able to facilitate that? Right. And then, if they're like, no, we can't, then you're like, okay, red flag confirmed. This is not for me. So I love that. I think that's such a good point.
Yeah. So I think it's always an interesting one because the peer is going to be like, run, this is terrible.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
Like, why are you
save yourself. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I love this. So with so much change happening in the marketplace right now, I hear a lot of people saying the phrase like the job market is really hard right now.
Yeah.
And I do think jobs aren't flying off the shelves like candy, right? We definitely have a more tense situation. But I also think for people who know themselves, know their values, know their skill set, have the career clarity that you were describing, it is still definitely possible to land the right job, even if it takes a little more time. So
Yes.
what advice do you give people in that situation when it comes to like job sourcing with their branding in mind, setting themselves up for success and finding those positions, especially knowing that right now the job market's a little bit of a longer timeline than it was, say, in 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is like the common topic of conversation. So I think like you were just talking about this, like with your brand in mind, I think you really have to understand what your brand is, right? And I think like what often happens in the typical job search is someone's like either unhappy where they are or they're thinking about making a change. And like immediately, because it's all we've ever been taught is like, update my resume, start applying for jobs online, right? Like, I don't even really know what I want to do instead. I just know that I want the heck out of here. And we just immediately like go into like the executional pieces that we've always been taught are like the way that you find a job. And obviously right now, just focusing on those like typical ways to land a job are not going to be so successful because it is so uber competitive. So you have to really start with the foundational pieces, which is both like the clarity and the branding. Like first really understanding like, what do I even want to do based on who I am and based on my values, my interests, my skill sets, my strength, my past experiences, right? Like, where do I really see myself? And that like you're uncovering and you're building the clarity there while also uncovering your brand. So when I was going back to talking earlier about areas of engagement, yes, that's helping you understand this is what I like, this is what I don't like, but that's also simultaneously helping you understand your brand because you're understanding, oh, these are the skill sets that I'm leveraging when I'm super engaged. Why do I like these skill sets? Oh, this is really probably like what comes naturally to me, where I'm really gifted, what I'm ultimately really good at. These are probably the skill sets and the strengths that I should be marketing and advertising, right? So it's like that twofold piece of like, clarity to figure out what you want to target, but also clarity to build your brand, which is going to help you better target the roles that you want for yourself. And I just think that most people either completely skip that step, or they just like brush over it very quickly and don't spend enough time on it. And they just, rush into the next pieces and they're like, oh, wait, why am I not landing a job right now? So we gotta focus on those foundational pieces.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Excellent. And it makes me think, I don't know if you follow her on TikTok, but there's a girl who does like the mom who just doesn't get how anything works anymore. And she did one day where she was like, put on your nicest suit, print out a copy of your resume and walk into that building and ask for 30 minutes with the CEO. You're young, you're good looking, you've got a degree. Of course they'll give you the job. And I'm watching this like, please don't listen to that advice. That's terrible advice. But also, I think it's so true that like we can't always get in front of the people we want to get in front of. And you probably hear it like I do. The ATS is like stopping job wrecks. It's not even the ATS. Yeah. It's just that the number of applicants we have for positions is so high that there's no way anybody's going to get through them all. And I remember when I worked at JP Morgan, I opened a position and we had 700 applicants in like 7 hours. And we closed the position and my recruiter was like, what do you want me to do with all of these? And I was like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah. Like nobody can handle that volume. So to your point of like doing that pre-networking, knowing where you want to go, getting that market research, having those ins and those connections, and then going for jobs that best fit you so you don't get lost in just the resume bump. I think that's a huge.
Yeah. And I think too, like with all this, like you've been saying, like I've been saying, we can't discount that it is difficult right now. Like even if you're doing all those things, that doesn't mean like you're going to do all, first of all, this is a process, right? So it can sometimes take a little bit longer to uncover your brand, to go through the networking, right? This isn't like I'm going to do this and 4 weeks later, I'm going to have a job. But at the same time, like even if you're doing all these things, it's still not easy peasy and you have to be persistent, right? Like ultimately, like my clients who are successful are the clients who like have grit, who are persistent, who are like, oh, that person didn't get back to me. No big deal. On to the next one because the next person will maybe get back to me, right? But when we are constantly second guessing ourselves, when we're like just kind of like, again, on a very high level, like doing things here and there and scattering things out, and we take 3 weeks off because we're feeling overwhelmed, like those are all the things that are going to delay you, right? Those are all the things that are going to make the process longer. So like you have to stay persistent. You have to like have a strong mindset, recognizing that you're going to be faced with rejection and it has nothing to do with you. You're still amazing. It's just a part of the process. Like those are ultimately the people who are successful and like land the jobs that they're super excited about and that are like what they've been hoping for.
Yeah. So normally at the end of every episode, I will ask, what is one piece of advice you have for people to implement tomorrow? But I feel like you just gave one that like I second is if you're in this position, just keep going.
Yes.
Be resilient. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't take every no as a rejection.
Yeah.
Because I do think people get so into their heads and then they're like, well, I just will take anything. Or they just stay in a situation where they're miserable because the effort to leave feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I will give you the chance if there's something else you wanted to lay down as one piece of advice. What would you tell listeners to go do tomorrow?
I mean, kind of building off of that, and I know it sounds a little bit corny, but I'm going to say don't settle. I really believe like that's something that's so important right now. And because, like you're saying, because the job market is tough, we kind of sometimes can get to this point where like, whatever, I don't care. Let me just take this. If you have doubts, if something doesn't feel right in your gut, don't settle and keep looking, because I always find that like then the next opportunity is amazing, right? Like I have a client who just got an offer. We've been talking a lot about it. She went back in, she negotiated for what she wanted. They came up a little bit, didn't really come to where she wanted it to be. And she was like, you know what? I'm just not going to take this. And she was like, I am so proud of myself and I feel so good about myself that I like got this offer. I negotiated the heck out of it. I like leveraged all these skills that I always doubted whether I had the ability to do this and really push back. I asked for what I wanted. They're not willing to do it. And I'm just not going to settle. And she's like on cloud nine because she's never been happier about, like, she's so proud of herself, you know? And she really knows, she's like, now that I've seen that I've gotten the offer, I've seen that I've had the ability to negotiate and really stand for what I want. Like, I know there's something better that's going to come after this. So I think it's like, it's important to really like stand for what you believe you deserve. Again, like, do your research. Don't be like crazy unrealistic, but like if you believe this is what I deserve, this is what I bring to the table, like stand firm in that.
Yeah. I love this. And it's something we overlook, and people will fall into jobs out of necessity and not out of intentionality. Yeah. Right? I hate my job, so I'll just take the next opportunity, even if it's for less money, even if it's not a company I want, even if it's for a bad boss, because I just have to get out of where I am. And then you're in the same spot 6 months later, going through the same effort again, rather than just continuing an extra few weeks and getting what you want. So I love this. It's a wonderful takeaway. So Eliana, for anybody who's listening to this, who's like, mind is blown and they need all of these things, where can they find you if they want to learn more about you or if they want to work with you?
So you can find me on social media, on Instagram. It's just, really original, Eliana _ Goldstein. Also on LinkedIn, just look me up by my name, but I'm pretty active in my DMs. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn messages. So you can always connect with me there. And I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, I so appreciate it, Eliana. Thank you for coming on the show. It was a wonderful chat. I feel like we covered so many topics. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, you love today's episode, make sure you give us 5 stars and you leave your comments below so we can get more amazing guests like Eliana back in the studio. Otherwise, we'll have to have you back in the future, and we appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I always love chatting with you.